Are there any grandparents in the house? All right. Then you know that we have a very special secret that we just can't keep to ourselves. Becoming a grandparent is one of life's sweetest blessings. About a year ago, my first grandchild was born. And I was right there in the hospital. I couldn't be in the delivery room, but as soon as the baby was born and the mother was okay, my son-in-law came out to get me, to bring me in, and he assured me that everything was fine. He said, "But I have to prepare you." And I was like, "Oh, prepare me?" He said, "Yes, he's very pink." Well, my grandson it's an interracial marriage, and my son-in-law was part of an interracial marriage. But somehow we had convinced ourselves that this new baby was going to be this little brown baby. And we weren't ready for the pink baby, right? So at least that's what he thought. And so I went in and I held him, and there was so much love, and oh, it was just unbelievable, the experience of joy. But I did end up saying, I'm kind of glad he prepared me. So it drives home the reality, the absurdity of how much skin pigmentation matters or doesn't matter in our lives. And I share that personal story because that's my subject matter, is how do we get over our fixation on this absurd notion of racial hierarchy? How do we jettison the fundamental undergirding belief in a hierarchy of human value? It has become the infrastructure, the mental infrastructure of our society. Now, this is a special year. This is 400 years since 1619, and it was actually this notion of a hierarchy of human value was actually codified into law right here in the state of Virginia. But actually, it was codified in much deeper ways 400 years before that by the church and led to the decimation and annihilation of indigenous cultures all over the world. So we have this archaic idea. Now, you know, TED is about ideas worth spreading. We need to come to grips with an idea that needs to come to an end. The idea. So the idea of believing that somehow the human family can be divided into a taxonomy of value and worth based on our physical characteristics, it doesn't belong at all in the 21st century, and it began so many centuries ago. I've come to recognize that idea is kind of like it's not kind of like, it really is the mental infrastructure of our society. Now, we don't really think about infrastructure. We don't think about the power grid. We don't think about our water systems. We don't think about all those things that become the basis of the design of our society. And this idea of a hierarchy of human value has become the basis of the design of our society. And that's why it's so important that we jettison it, that we get rid of it. And if there are any Star Trek fans in the audience, you know when they jettison something, it is gone. Except Dr. Spock. Now, some have asked, well, how did you come to make this your passion? How did you come to believe that this is such an important work? And I'll share a story with you. I gave birth to my first child many, many decades ago. Her name, Intianu, means noble spirit. And when we took Intianu for her 6-week checkup, the doctors discovered a heart defect. It was called tetralogy of Fallot, and it basically meant that she was a blue baby. She was a brown blue baby, but she was a blue baby. They told us there's nothing we can do for her until she's 5 years old. Take her home, we'll monitor, and when she's 5 years old, we'll be able to operate. What they weren't telling us is that Intianu wouldn't live that long, and she died about 3 weeks later. Now, as you know, a mother, father, we never get over the loss of a child. But my brief time with Intianu catapulted my life's work. I spent the next 30, 40 years learning all that I could learn about how to be healthy, and most importantly, how to help others to be healthy and to live healthy lives. And that journey took me from clinical practice to social program design to public policy work, government reinvention, and ultimately to philanthropy, where I had the privilege of overseeing hundreds of millions of dollars to help create healthy communities. But the one lesson that I learned, and this is what I want to convey and engage you in a commitment to do something about it. The one lesson that I learned is that what we believe, particularly about ourselves and other people, what we believe shapes our decisions and our actions. And as long as we allow the belief in a hierarchy of human value, the mythology, to stand in the way of our innate need to relate to one another equally as human beings, we will continue to have the inequities and the disparities that we have today. It's not enough to deal with the consequences and the symptoms that come from racism. We have to uproot racism itself. Now, human beings, we are wired, especially all mammals, but particularly us, we are wired to innately expect connection and bonding with one another. We are designed innately to care for and to extend caring to one another. And this thing that stands in the way of that has created fear and separation, it actually makes us physically ill. When we do not have positive responses from other human beings, it triggers our stress response. And that stress response happens at a cellular and a molecular and a systemic level, and it makes us more vulnerable to chronic disease. So there's an urgency for us to jettison this false ideology and make way for a new way of thinking. Now, Buckminster Fuller reminds us that change doesn't come by attacking an old model. Change comes when we create new models that make the old models obsolete. The cell phone made the old landline obsolete. Uber is making our former transportation systems obsolete. So we have to create a new model of relating to and with one another. And that model is what I call RX racial healing. I believe it is the prescription for America to figure out how we can learn to relate with and to one another as equal human beings. Now, we have enough science to know how you do this, how you change people's hearts and minds. You do it by intentionally bringing diverse people together who share narratives about their own lives, narratives that are authentic. You listen meaningfully to those narratives and you connect, and your biases begin to fall away. We call these racial healing circles. We call them RX racial healing circles. They are not painful. They are actually stimulating the release of oxytocin, and they help us to recognize that we have so much more in common than we have different. I want to share another story with you about bias. Do we have any HGTV fans in the room? Home and Garden TV, if those of you that don't know. Well, I watch it because they never kill people on that show. But you know, if you watch enough HGTV, what are you going to do? You're going to remodel your house. And if you're going to remodel your house, you're going to create, if it's an old house, you're going to create an open concept. And if you're going to create an open concept, you're going to take a wall down, right? So quickly, I hired contractors. I got 5 estimates. 3 said the wall, you have to know if the wall is load-bearing, right? So 3 said the wall was not load-bearing. 2 said it was, right? So I got my flashlight, went down the basement, moved the joist from the ceiling, looked up, and decided it was not load-bearing, so I hired someone who agreed with me. And then it was demolition day. And there they were, taking out the cabinet, you know, just like on TV. And the supervisor came by. They were about to take the wall out, and he said, "What are you going to do if it's load-bearing?" Well, the lead person said, "It's not load-bearing." He said, "What are you going to do if it is?" He says, "We're prepared," right? So I said, "Okay." So I run upstairs to get my suitcase because I'm flying out again. And while I'm upstairs, my house starts to shake, rattle, and roll. It starts to do the Watusi. I run downstairs. All the workmen have run outside. I say, "What have you done to my house?" The workman looks at me and very gently says, "No, ma'am, it's an earthquake." Well, I put my hands on my hips and channeled my Alabama-born mother, and I said, "What kind of fool do you think I am? This is Washington, D.C. We don't have earthquakes." And I called him everything but a child of God. He took it in. He said, "No, ma'am, go back inside, turn on your TV. I'm from Guatemala. I know an earthquake, right?" So I go back in and I turn on the TV, and there it is, right across the screen, 5.6 earthquake hits the DC area. What are the chances that at the moment... So I had to apologize to him. I share that story because it demonstrates how it is our biases, they surface when we are most anxious, when we are most afraid, when we are most stressed, when a policeman has to make a life and death decision, when a medical doctor is not sure what to do, when a classroom teacher doesn't have control of the class. This is when our innate biases surface. We cannot afford to continue to let that be the pattern, because it's wrong, and also because most of the children in the United States today are children of color. And most of these children are facing obstacles that are specifically related to this racialized infrastructure of our society, this racialized consciousness. So I invite you all to recognize that for the children, for ourselves, it is time to leave that antiquated notion, to recognize that we are one extended human family. Genomic science, anthropology, all kinds of science tells us we actually all trace our lineage back to a common ancestry in Africa. We trace our lineage back to someone called mitochondrial Eve. I'm sure that wasn't her name, but the scientists call her that. So we have a genetic bond, all of us, and this notion, these other ideas that lead to oppression and exclusion, they have no place. So I invite you, particularly Charlottesville, that became a symbol of the resurgence of the absurdity of a hierarchy of human value. Charlottesville, I invite you as a community to be part of the vanguard of those who are healing from racism, who are eliminating that fallacy, and are modeling what it means to care for one another in the ways that we were designed to. Do it for yourselves, and do it for the children who need us.